that range and matter to our communities, organize for policy change at the state and the national level, and recruit and train a pipeline of progressive candidates to run for office. Our members are from all walks of life, intergenerational, multicultural, activists, artists, organizers, but most importantly, passionate fighters for true social justice and meaningful change in our communities across the state. We have chapters in both Vermont and in New Hampshire, so look for us wherever you are. So this is what we know. Our current systems are deeply dysfunctional, rooted in historical oppression, and fragile. When those fragile systems break, it is Vermonters who have been systemically kept out of places of power that are the most impacted. Abenaki and Indigenous persons, racial and ethnic minorities, LGBTQIA communities, individuals with disabilities, senior citizens, new Americans, our migrant community, youth, young adults, poor and working poor, they're the ones who carry the weight of the policies and the systems when they've gone wrong. Vermonters are suffering across the state and are living with an uncertain future that is not sustainable. From our climate crisis to COVID-19, we're tasked with doing things differently, radically even, to get from the place where we're in to the world as we most want it to be. We each work in pursuit of a government that works for us, reflects us, and is responsive to our needs. RAD is a membership organization for all of us, and I hope that you will join us if you're not already a member, so that together we can grow the movement to win. You can find us on the web at radvt.org, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. So I'm going to go through a little bit of the logistics of how tonight will work so that you'll all understand. In an attempt to actually minimize the many, many disruptions that are possible in this new online world, everyone on this call will be muted and will be unable to unmute. So this means that there may be a pause between speakers as our moderator tries to unmute the next speaker. So we appreciate your patience. We have an incredible lineup of guests today, and so we will actually not be taking questions from the audience, but we'll do our best to note any that might appear in the chat. And if there's time, we can address those. We are recording this event and we'll post it to both our YouTube, Facebook, and our website later this week. So tonight, we are fortunate to have the participation of 4 candidates for Lieutenant Governor for the state of Vermont. Our participants tonight are Senator Debbie Ingram, Brenda Segal, Molly Gray, and Senator Tim Ashe. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here. So we're going to begin now with some opening statements from the candidates. Now, many people across the state do not understand the unique role and the powers of a lieutenant governor in the state of Vermont. So please share with our audience your vision and definition of what that role might mean, how you will best fulfill those duties once elected, and any innovative ideas you have to amplify the role of the lieutenant governor. If we can begin with Senator Ingram.
Thank you, Kai. And thanks to Rights and Democracy, and thanks to all of you for tuning in today. My name is Debbie Ingram. I use she, her pronouns. I want to first talk about when we define the role of Lieutenant Governor, that's the person that steps in when the governor is out of state, or heaven forbid, if the governor were to pass away in office. And that really is kind of the main job in a way, is to be ready to step in. And I believe I have the experience to be able to be prepared on day one, should that hopefully never happen. I've been a state senator for 4 years now, representing Chittenden County. I have served before that on the Williston Select Board. And I have been the executive director of an organizing group called Vermont Interfaith Action, which in fact has partnered with RAD on many important issues, including raising the minimum wage over the years. So I think one of the first important duties is to be ready. But other than that, it's a kind of create your own adventure sort of position. One of the things that I would particularly like to do is to be able to reach out to Vermonters, to go around the state, to have forums and town halls, and to talk about issues that are on people's minds, but mostly, especially, to listen to people and to understand what everyday Vermonters are experiencing. I've always found that the people who are closest to the issues are the ones who have the best solutions for them. And so I'd want to listen and to understand what their experience of Vermont is. I would especially actually in that like to focus on racial injustice in Vermont. I think that we all too often don't speak enough about that. I have over the last decade been able to attend workshops and trainings in which I have tried to confront my white privilege and my white fragility and the great inequality that exists based on race in all over the nation and in Vermont as well. And I think that we need to really shine a light on that and to have some real discussions about that. So that would be something that I would definitely want to focus on as Lieutenant Governor. Other duties that the Lieutenant Governor has is to preside over the Senate. So when the Senate's meeting, you kind of run the meetings. You serve on the Committee on Committees, which is a nice bureaucratic name for the group that assigns senators to the different standing committees. And you do get to vote every once in a while to break a tie. But then I think that also there is the opportunity, because you're in the State House frequently, much more frequently than the governor is, to set a tone for what the environment is in the State House. And I would want to use that to try to build collegiality and cooperation, to treat everyone of both chambers warmly, to particularly shepherd new legislators, particularly women and people of color, who may find they're swimming upstream a little bit sometimes. And so I would want to use the office in that way. And then just one other idea I would throw out is an idea that I'm using in my own campaign, which is to make videos. And I think that would be maybe videos or podcasts would also be a way to amplify the issues that are facing Vermonters and to hear from folks. So I think that that in a nutshell is what I would say about the Lieutenant Governor position.
Thank you so much. That was really wonderful. Next, we'd like to hear from Brenda Segal. Brenda.
Hi, yeah, I'm Brenda Segal, and I think that one of the reasons that I'm running for Lieutenant Governor is because it's so important that we elevate leaders who have marginalized voices all across our state. The work I've been doing on the ground has been working to build movement and organize with marginalized folks in every part of our state, especially around the opioid crisis in the last 2 years, but around economic justice and climate justice throughout my life. I think that when I first ran for governor, the first article that came out about me said something like, from the Bennington battlefields to the Derby line, you can hear a resounding who? Because we couldn't even conceive of someone like me, a low-income single mom, running for an office like that, or really even having a place in our government at all. And what Vermonters showed us in that race was not only do they want their elected leaders to reflect who they are, but also that they understand that when people have faced the problems, are at the decision-making table, then real solutions emerge. We've seen that with the COVID crisis, with community leaders stepping up and creating mutual aid efforts all across the state. And we've seen it with the climate crisis with folks marching and rallying and even interrupting our very own legislature. In the Lieutenant Governor's seat, we have a incredible, yes, all of those duties that Debbie listed are there as well, but we also have this incredible opportunity to actually engage people on the ground to build better our economy in the shell of the economy that is left right now. We have the option at this moment to actually center the policies that we build around the most marginalized voices. And we need someone at the helm. We need someone in that position who understands exactly what it's like to live that life in this state. We need someone who has been doing that work on the ground right here in Vermont, so that we have the opportunity to actually have someone there who can step back from the podium or pass the mic and make sure that the stories that need to be heard are being heard and told, and that we go into the most marginalized communities and listen where folks are and provide opportunity for a platform where folks are. And that is essential. And then in addition to that, make sure that we're connecting as a liaison to the legislature and to the governor, not only those stories, but those people. Because it's not really about my vision. While I have a strong vision, it's not really about my vision. It's about the people across this state, especially the ones that for so long have not been heard. And there's so much to talk about how the Abenaki tribe, for example, has the eugenics program, and we still have not passed a reparations bill. I mean, seriously, we really need to be talking to the folks and having those folks at the table, and then we need to be doing the work, not asking them to. We ask way too much of the people who have way too little. So I think that we have this opportunity in Lieutenant Governor's role to build on what's there right now and the accessibility that's there right now, and make it even broader and greater.
Thank you so much, Brenda. I appreciate that. Excellent. Next, we'd like to hear from Molly.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Thank you, Franzi. Thank you, James. Thank you, Rights and Democracy. Thank you to everyone who's tuning in tonight, either via Zoom or on Facebook Live. My name is Molly Gray. I am running for Lieutenant Governor, and this is such an interesting and important moment to demystify the Lieutenant Governor's office. The Lieutenant Governor is so uniquely placed to be a platform for the constellation of issues, opportunities, and challenges facing our state at this historic moment. The Lieutenant Governor should work collaboratively and closely with senators and with the House and the legislature, with the governor, whomever he or she may be, but most importantly, from my perspective, with our communities across Vermont, with our families, and with those people who are most impacted by our policies as we move forward and transform our state to the Vermont that we want for each other. We've been stalled on those issues. We've been stalled on paid family leave. We've been stalled on childcare. We've been stalled on addressing the inequity that comes with a lack of equal access to broadband across Vermont, and with that, access to education, access to medicine, access to economic opportunity. We've been stalled on taking real, meaningful action to mitigate the impact of climate change. We've been stalled on workforce development and investing in our state colleges. I grew up on a farm in Newberry. I was born there. My family still farms there today. I'm a product of Vermont's education system. I went to Newberry Elementary School and Oxbow High School. I'm a proud graduate of the University of Vermont. I've worked in Washington, where I helped get Congressman Welch elected, and then moved to Washington to help launch his office. I've worked in the halls of Congress and also for the International Committee of the Red Cross, fighting for the rights of others, advocating for the rights of Guantanamo detainees, running field missions into conflict zones of policymakers to ensure that we put human need at the forefront of our decision making. I came home to Vermont because I love our state. And as Eleanor Roosevelt once said, where does human rights begin? It begins right here in our communities at home. I have committed my career to fighting for human rights. I bring a human rights-based approach to my work in the Attorney General's office. I've lived and worked around our communities. My vision for the Lieutenant Governor's office is that we capture this moment and we do move forward. We transform our state into a state where our communities thrive, where we are the best place to raise and support families, and we protect the land and environment for future generations. I feel like I have the experience and the skills, the qualifications to be ready on day one to be an effective leader, but also to use this office to connect our communities to the Capitol, to Montpelier, be it via Zoom, be it via telephone town halls, which we've been hosting over the last several weeks, be it by getting in the car and driving across the state, and most importantly, putting those individuals across Vermont who are most impacted by the policies coming out of Montpelier at the forefront every single day. So I'm looking forward to tonight's conversation. Thank you again to Kaya and to Rights and Democracy for holding this forum. I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you very much, Molly. And now Senator Ash, can you join us? There you are. Hi. We'll just 1 second, we're unmuting you.
There we
Perfect.
go. Yes, now I can join you. Well, thanks, Kaya. My name's Tim Ash. I'm the president of the Vermont State Senate, and I am running to become the next lieutenant governor. Before I begin telling you why I'm running and some of my background, I want to say that I've been reflecting since news of George Young in Minnesota dying at the hands of law enforcement, and yet the latest example of unjust police policies and tactics. And I wish it was just the one instance, but obviously this is a pattern across the country, and we have to do everything we can to root that out. I'm running for lieutenant governor for the same reason, really, that I first saw public office, which is to close the gap between what I call the two Vermonts. I think it's pretty straightforward when we think about what the two Vermonts are. Obviously, there's one Vermont where people get to enjoy all the accolades, safest state, best place to raise a family, and on and on. But we all know, and the fact that you're Rights and Democracy's members or activists, you know there's another Vermont where people are struggling economically, where kids suffer in the homes of those who have addiction, mental health challenges, where there's violence in the home. And I have dedicated my entire political life, as well as my personal and professional lives, to doing everything I can to closing the gap between the two Vermonts. The three primary areas in which I will focus on, first is protecting the most vulnerable. I have a long record of blocking proposals to reduce benefits to people, whether they're people with disabilities, cutting back on their healthcare subsidies, you name it. I have been there to block almost all of them, beginning with my first years in the legislature. Second is addressing the broad issue of affordability, which is really a two-sided coin. On the one hand, we need to raise wages for people and raise the benefits that they get. On the other side, we need to create more economic opportunity, particularly in struggling communities. And that, to me, requires us to focus our economic development strategies on those employers who prioritize people and the planet above all other things, while also making a profit so they can stay in business. And then third, taking the next step so that Vermont can regain its previous status as the national leader on renewable and clean energies. I have demonstrated over the years, and I hope many of you have seen this, my ability to translate a vision into action to get things done. While I would never claim full credit, Kaya and others who have been in the legislature know, as does Senator Ingram, that no one person passes any piece of legislation. But under my leadership the last few years, the Senate has passed among the most progressive legislative agendas in the country. And while we can always do more, I'd like to highlight just a few of them to remind everyone. First, we increased the minimum wage significantly for the first time in many, many years. Many of us wished it had gone further and voted to make it go further, but we got the very highest amount we could in light of opposition from some in the House and in the governor's office. We achieved what governors and legislators had failed to do for many years, which is provide long-term funding and a plan to clean up our lake and rivers. And we've made sure there's no more pollution of kids in schools and childcare facilities through lead in drinking water. We've doubled weatherization funding, advanced more renewable energy resources, and modernized our efficiency program. We passed the first gun safety legislation in Vermont's history that has any meaningful impact. We've codified a woman's right to choose, passed equal pay legislation, passed laws that protect women in the workplace from sexual harassment. We've twice blocked serious proposals from the governor to cut deeply into the K through 12 system. And I had to stand in the front and fight those two things back alongside Speaker Johnson. And I am so glad that we prevailed. And in the Senate, I have marshaled a veto-proof majority for paid family leave, which will outlast me as I leave the Senate, seeking the lieutenant governor's office. And in that role, I would do whatever I can to twist the last single arm in the House so that we can get that passed. We've also passed a conversion of Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, working with Senator Ingram and you, Kaya. We passed ethnic studies legislation, which was long overdue. And we've blocked Trump's most anti-immigrant policies by prohibiting law enforcement in Vermont from participating in any of his schemes that tackle or attack people based on their religious background. Finally, my professional experience speaks to my activist roots. My first job out of UVM was working for Bernie for 3 years. I crisscrossed the state with him. I was a union organizer for the American Federation of Teachers. I worked in community action, working with mobile home park residents throughout the state, developed 400 units of affordable housing at Cathedral Square, the state's largest affordable housing provider for seniors and people with disabilities. And I've taught at CCV and what was Johnson State, which is one of the reasons I joined the speaker to block their proposal to close the 3 campuses. In some ways, I present an unusual candidate to rights and democracy advocates because I have activist roots, but have also chosen to seek a position in the Senate as Senate president where I have responsibility to deliver, making me probably the highest ranking activist in legislative history. And so I mention my record to show that I'm capable of getting things done while having an activist heart. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator. So now we're going to move to the question and answer portion of the evening, and I appreciate everyone's patience as we've gone through this. So let's talk about the economy. So the economic impacts of this time are uncertain and devastating for many in Vermont. During this time, the need for policies that ensure a livable or dignified wage for all, comprehensive paid sick and family leave, and fair working conditions, wages for our migrant workers, and workers' rights to organize and collective bargaining have been made clear. Please discuss one key initiative that you will champion in support of improving employment and labor, and how you will help with the implementation on that issue. Senator Ingram, can you start us off?
Thank you. So I would hearken back to what I told you in my opening statement, that for the last 13 years, I have been the executive director and lead organizer of Vermont Interfaith Action, which is a faith-based community organizing group of 60 caring and inclusive and compassionate, justice-oriented congregations all over the state. And we have been running a campaign for a long time in conjunction with Rights and Democracy that we call Building a Moral Economy. And that to me is would be at the heart of my agenda. I think it is wrong that so many Vermonters have to work 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. I think it is wrong that Vermonters in this crisis, it has been revealed that so many people were not able to have enough, they didn't have enough savings to be able to function for more than a couple of weeks, running out of money for food and other basic necessities. It is wrong and immoral the way our economy works now, the extreme income inequality in this country. And while I'm pleased that we did make some progress on the minimum wage, I think my very top priority in building a moral economy would be to work towards a livable wage. And we know that it's much higher than the minimum wage that we have now. But also I would want to work on the other side of the equation, which is to lower the cost or to take on some of the cost of some of the things that are important to everybody and treat them as a public good so that we pay for them collectively. So I mean, for instance, healthcare, moving as close as we possibly can to universal healthcare, or at least to universal primary care, so that we pay for that collectively and it's not a burden on individual workers. Our housing is also far too expensive. We drive many people out of state because we can't afford to buy homes or to rent in the places where they work. And that's other side of the equation, the expense portion that we need to work on. Childcare is something else that I think should be viewed as a public good. so that we are all investing in the children of everyone in the state. So these are the kinds of things that I would do to try to bring about a more moral economy in Vermont.
Thank you very much, Senator. Brenda Segal.
Hi. So I hope that this one works for a minute. So, so I think we do have to build our economy from the bottom up, and we need to center the most marginalized voices and the most marginalized folks when we do that, or else we're not actually solving the problem. So we have the moment to do that right now. We've been screaming it from the rooftops, but we'd have to tear down the system to create it, and now the system is torn down. So we have this moment right now to actually build the economy from the bottom up and to center those same voices. All of the issues are intersectional, so if we work on one of them and we don't work on others, then we're not actually working on one of them. So the reason that I choose that one is because it encompasses building a Green Mountain New Deal. It encompasses having a livable wage, and that doesn't mean $15 an hour. That means getting to livable and then attaching it to inflation. It encompasses paid family and medical leave. There must be medical leave. It encompasses having universal health care, and it encompasses really putting the people and the planet first. Our goal, those are all tools, but it needs to be centered around a goal. And our goal is to have a society that not only can survive, but also can thrive. I think that we also often leave behind migrant workers when we talk about this issue, and we need to ensure that we are not leaving them behind. 40% of migrant workers in this state make below the minimum wage, and it has failed to be addressed adequately by the legislature. And so that's a voice that needs to be centered in this discussion for sure, because these are people that contribute to our economy. These are folks who are human beings right here in Vermont, and we need to do better with that. And then coming back to the way that we have left out Indigenous folks, we need to center in that building a bottom-up economy, making sure that we have a reparations program for the eugenics program that we did for Indigenous folks. And so I think that when we build that bottom-up economy and we center a creative economic solution, then we actually get to a place where people and the planet come first, and where everybody, this is a state that we can build together. And none of us should be trying to build it ourselves or through our own vision. We should be building together and ensuring that our communities are the strongest possibly they can be.
Thank you, Brenda. Molly?
What initiative would I focus on? What we knew before COVID-19 was that half of Vermonters could not afford an emergency expense of $1,000 or more. It shouldn't take a global pandemic for us to understand the value and the urgency of a livable wage. What we know from response to crisis is that our focus has to squarely be on addressing need and structuring our policies and a budget around addressing need. A livable wage, if we think about a paycheck, is more than just the salary that we receive. It's what we do with that salary. When we get home, we pay our student loan debt, which when I graduated from law school was $125,000. We pay our loans, our mortgages, our rent, we pay for prescription drugs, we pay for healthcare, we pay for childcare, and there's not much left at the end. So our focus is not only on a livable wage, but focusing on the programs that are going to make that livable wage go farther. For me, the #1 priority is paid family and medical leave. It has to be universal, it has to be equitable, it has to be focused on our caregivers. And I'll share this, and this is a personal story that I haven't shared publicly before. Last spring, I had a dear family member who was in the hospital, and I had used up all my vacation days and all my sick days. And at some point, I was going to have to make a decision. Was I going to pay my rent, pay for my student loans, pay for myself, my life, or care for my mother? And I didn't, and without having a paid family leave bill in Vermont, Vermonters are making those decisions every single day. So to not see that bill taken up last spring as a top priority for Vermont put me in a place of deciding that the focus of our state, global pandemic or not, has to be on caring for our families, caring for our people, caring for our communities. And that is the moment that we're in, and that is how we have to move forward. That will be my #1 priority.
Thank you, Molly. Senator Ash?
There we go. Thanks. I'm getting to the unmute moment. I'm going to be really direct about what the top thing I will do is work as the Democratic nominee with progressive support for Lieutenant Governor to make sure that either David Zuckerman or Rebecca Holcomb, whoever wins the primary, is elected. Much of what you've heard from the other candidates so far are aspirations, which I think everyone on this call shares. Who is in the governor's office makes a big difference on every single one of those fronts. Because with Governor Scott, we haven't just needed 76 votes to pass something in the House or 16 in the Senate. We have needed 120 in the Senate. So very different landscape. Molly just presented a scenario which speaks to the importance of who the governor is. The time period that Molly described actually was just after Governor Scott vetoed a paid family medical leave that had been passed by the legislature, but we didn't have the votes in the legislature to override the governor. Last year, we kept trying to work towards a solution. And then this past year, we did pass paid leave and fell 1 vote short in the House. So who the governor is absolutely critical. It's the reason why the minimum wage is going to go to $12.55 and not $15 right away, is because the governor has vetoed 2 minimum wage bills. It has been left to people like me to push for the most aggressive increases possible, and who the governor is makes a big difference. Now, what I will turn to in addition to increasing the minimum wage, paid family leave, I will work with the legislature, and I hope we can do this year, to have a Vermont correction, if you will, to the Supreme Court's Janus decision, which has made it very hard for unions to continue to operate and collect dues. I also want to make sure that we are moving forward with an aggressive, robust youth employment program built off of the model of the Youth Conservation Corps, Resource, and Vermont Works for Women. I believe this moment actually presents an amazing opportunity to substantially bolster our youth employment programs that give people much needed skills so that they can live successful futures. I also very strongly believe right now we need to pass hazard pay legislation to reward all the essential workers who don't get paid very much, who have been showing up and putting themselves and their family at risk throughout COVID-19. I am very proud that the Senate voted 28-0, the most conservative and most liberal members I was able to unify to support a hazard pay grant program, which we got through the Senate. It's now stalled in the House. Hopefully we can get that done.
Thank you all for that. So now let's shift to education. We're going to begin first with pre-K through 12. So really, this pandemic has challenged our public education system in ways that we did not know were possible before. Families are struggling to support their students in an online learning environment, and students who have disabilities are potentially falling through the cracks. What do you see as a key root cause of the current challenges in our current educational system for these gaps, and how will you impact those challenges in your role as the Lieutenant Governor? We can begin first with Senator Ingram.
I serve on the Senate Education Committee. I'm the vice chair, as a matter of fact. So on these issues, I spend a lot of time talking about. And certainly in this COVID crisis, we have seen, if we had any doubt before how important our teachers are and our whole education system is, we don't have it anymore, because COVID has really shown how vital these folks are. And I think one of the things we need to do is to address the funding system in education. The governor, though, has been very strategic in trying to pit property taxpayers against parents and children, and as if they weren't all the same people, but also that he's created this false divisiveness. And I do think it would help to reform our education funding system by switching from a residential property tax to a completely income-based tax. It has income sensitivity now, but I think a straight income-based would be better. more efficient. But we have to also look at how important our teachers are, create an attitude of investing in our schools rather than this rhetoric that the governor espouses all the time about you know, how it just is backbreaking the costs of our education system, as if our children are not worth investing in. We've also seen in the COVID crisis that we need to work on things like our broadband access, which does not cover all of the state, quite obviously, and has created situations of inequity in that many families are not able to access it. So we need a lieutenant governor who's really going to talk about how important our pre-K through 12 education is, and investing in our teachers.
Thank you very much for that. Brenda.
Okay, I'm gonna hope it gets through this one because it's really been clicking on and off the whole time. So, sorry. So the premise of the question is that we're having all these challenges right now, but these challenges have existed for certain students forever. And the problem is that we're kind of okay with leaving some kids behind, and we don't do enough to fix that in the first place. We've known that this problem exists. We've known that there isn't a great broadband, as we're seeing tonight, in many areas. In Essex County, 1 in 3 people doesn't have access to the internet. I'm sitting here as a candidate, and I do not always have access, and my son's been finishing school this way as well. And so, yes, we've known that these problems are there, and yet we're not fixing them. So we can't just say, oh my goodness, all of a sudden we've just learned that if there's an inequitable system. We've known there is, and now we're saying we have to change it. So we need to implement the ethnic studies standard immediately, because it harms all of our children that they aren't learning the true history of our state and country, and that there is not a welcoming and safe environment in our school systems. We need to ensure that we have a more meaningful way for parents and children to advocate for themselves. And we need to elect people into school boards who have faced the problems, so that we are solving some of the problems on the ground level as well. So that means that we have to be working with the people that are on the ground, and teachers. It should have never been left on teachers alone to figure out how to deal with, how to address children who don't have internet. We knew that it was a problem, so there should have been a system in place that was an alternate system for those students. And I think I'm frozen.
You still have time. Your image is frozen, but your voice is good.
Okay, can you? Hold on.
We're good. We can be patient. We can hear you while we try to get you back. Me? Yes, there we go. Okay. Now we got you.
Okay. I'm very sorry. Like I was saying about the internet. So I think that we have to ensure that that we're creating a system that's the most equitable that we possibly can in the first place, and that we're taking what we're learning right now and not saying like, oh, we need to say that it is because of a system that already needed to be changed, already needed to be shifted right now.
Thank you, Brenda, and thank you everyone for your patience as well. I'm glad you didn't give up. So if we can continue on. Molly, would you be willing to join us?
I think we should begin by thanking all of the teachers on the call this evening and tuning in via Facebook, and all the parents who are also now teaching from home. This is an incredible time. I was reflecting in preparing for this question on a conversation I had with Miss Miller, a 5th grade teacher in Colchester, just a couple of weeks ago during Teacher Appreciation Week. And Miss Miller reminded me of what I think so many of us know, and that is that our schools provide so much more than education. They provide the infrastructure and the safety net, the support services, meals, for so many children across Vermont, for so many students. So our teachers deserve our every support. I think that is clearer than clear today. But our challenge is that we have not invested in education in the same way that we invest in other services in the state. We put a 12-year moratorium on investment in infrastructure in our schools. There are so many needs that have been expressed to our legislature, emergency needs for our schools. So I think our greatest challenge now is to focus on that investment, to focus on providing equal access to education for every student in Vermont, to ensuring that we're providing access to broadband, and that's already been discussed. But if we think about broadband in the same way that we think about electricity and heat and water, and as the vehicle for economic opportunity, if we continue in remote learning, that's an area for us to improve, to succeed, and to really have an equitable future. And second, to focus on infrastructure and to supporting our local schools across the state and our teachers and the services that they provide.
Thank you, Molly. Senator Ash.
Thanks. There's the slight delay before I'm allowed to unmute, so that's why I panicked for a moment for those watching. Let me begin by saying that I am the son of a career public school teacher, and I have memories of basically every night at my kitchen table, my mother grading papers. And I think one of the reasons that made her such an amazing teacher was somehow she figured out how to make sure that the highest achieving student in the class was being pushed to his or her limits, while the students who were really struggling were able to get kind of an accelerated amount of support to get up to grade level. So my appreciation for teachers runs very deep. And I have to say, it's one of the reasons why. And it's not like you hold a big, you don't hold a big press conference to say we stopped a bad idea from happening, but it's one of the reasons some of us took so much to block Governor Scott's 2 proposals that would have made deep cuts to teachers benefits, programming, and would have made the very profession of teaching greatly diminished at just the time we need to develop even more stronger teachers for our future. The primary problem facing our schools, frankly, is poverty. It's plain and simple poverty. When kids show up and they're hungry, they can't learn. When kids show up from families where there's been violence in the home and they show up with all the trauma that comes in, it's left to the teachers and staff to address it. When kids are coming from homes that struggle with mental health challenges, and of course, not all those homes are homes without much financial resources. Mental health affects all of us, but in homes where it's exacerbated and where the environmental health issues are exacerbated, those kids all show up to school, and it is the schools who now become not just the place where you learn your reading and writing and arithmetic, but also where you get most of the social supports that you need in order to develop. My primary focus over the last few years has really been to bolster the mental health system in our schools. Many of the people who do mental health work in our schools 3 years ago were making as little as $11 an hour. I went around the state long before I was campaigning for office and talked with mental health professionals at every one of the state's designated mental health agencies to ask them how we could support them. And they said, we view this as a profession, not just some starter job, but for $11 an hour, it's hard to stick with it. So we immediately went back and increased all of their pay statewide by $3 an hour on the spot. The other thing I think we really need to do is get to universal school meals. We've been making great progress in the last few years. Dozens of new schools have been coming online and providing fresh, locally sourced meals at our schools. And I think we all know that for many kids, the school meals are the one healthy meal they're going to get in their day. So doing breakfast and lunch and increasingly sending kids home with healthy foods is absolutely critical. And I think one of the great opportunities right now with COVID-19, some of the federal money we've received, I very strongly hope we will be using so that in the fall, it will be local foods that are getting sent home with every kid, regardless of income.
Thank you, Senator. Okay, so now we're going to speak about higher education. So Vermont State College system is vulnerable right now, and proposals have been made to close campuses. We know this is neither wanted nor feasible. part of the reason that the Vermont State College system, and to a lesser degree, the University of Vermont, are in this predicament is that the state has been disinvesting in public higher education since about the 1980s. We currently rank 49th or 50th, depending on whose ranking you're looking at, in terms of state support for higher education. This disparity impacts everything from staffing to financial aid available to college students. So the question that we have posed to us today is, are you, as the Lieutenant Governor, a potential Lieutenant Governor, committed to supporting efforts to increase appropriations to get us up to the national average? And please share any ideas that you may have about how to reinvest to be able to make that happen. Can we begin first with Senator Ingram?
Yes, I am committed to supporting efforts to increase appropriations for our college system. It is true that we have been told for many years that we're 48th, 49th, 50th among states in investing. It wasn't really until the chancellor made this, kind of nuclear option proposal that we really, everybody dropped everything and decided we should really pay attention to this. So we are going to use federal funds to be able to fund a transition period where we can bring in a consultant to help analyze this situation and make proposals to the trustees and the legislature. And it's way past time that we do that. So I totally support that. And going forward, we need to really to find the money to support the colleges better. One suggestion I would make is VSAC right now sends $5 million a year out of state, helping students who go to other states. I think we should keep that money in state, and I think there are other things we can look at. But I also want to say, while we're talking about higher education, I just want to bring in what UVM is, the non-tenure track lecturers slashing their salaries by 25% without looking at administrative bloats that they have, or without cutting the salaries of administrators. Like the President Garamella makes over $400,000 a year, and they're only cutting his salary a tiny little bit. And they're these other lecturers in a situation where they won't be able to pay the rent or buy food for their families.
So I want to apologize if we are frozen. Are we frozen for anyone, or is it just for me? Is it my end of the bandwidth? The rural bandwidth. I do apologize, Senator Ingram. If you did not have a chance to finish your comments, you have a few more. Okay, so I do apologize, Senator Ingram. We'll try to give you some more time later on if you didn't get a chance to finish your comments. I do apologize for that. So up next, we're going to try again. Can we have Brenda? Would you be willing to share with us your thoughts on how to increase those appropriations and your support for that?
Sure. Yes, I absolutely support efforts to increase appropriations. And I want to just say that I said this before if I wasn't getting cut out, but that we absolutely must talk about education as a cradle to grave. We need to pay for education throughout people's lives, and we need to commit to funding it fully, because that is what makes it possible for people to have stronger possibilities, a lot of folks to have stronger possibilities. Also, we need to, when we're talking about the colleges, not to change them in such a way that we're dictating to people in poverty what they're allowed to learn. Right now, people are going to NVU and learning things like economics. My great grandmother was a house parent at NVU Linden when it was just Linden, and then or Johnson actually, and my great grandfather was also superintendent of schools here in Southern Vermont in Windham County. And so I think that when Vermont has been able to fund colleges in the past, and now all of a sudden or not all of a sudden, but for many, 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 many years, we've been creating a situation where many kids can't even access UVM, one of our state colleges, at all. And then we talk about closing only 3 schools. And so, and those are the schools that those same kids can access. And then we talk about why aren't our kids staying here? And when we're talking, so education has to become part of the solution. And those NVU schools, 75% of those people are eligible for financial aid. And we have to do better in terms of communities of color, because right now we have communities of color being disproportionately suspended from school at this moment. In Vermont, where this isn't just a story across the country, this is happening inside Vermont. And so we have to do better, and also parents are targeted that same way. And so when we're talking about the way that education needs to be funded, we need to talk about cradle to grave, and we need to fully commit. And it isn't enough to say that the chancellor has come and given us different ideas of what needs to be funded over and over again. We absolutely instead have to say that we are committed to funding. We know that we've been in pretty much last place for a long time, so we could have made a different decision, and we can now.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. So up next, if we can please have Molly.
I don't think we can talk about education in Vermont. And when I talk about education, I'm talking about vocational, technical training, training in the trades, our state colleges, also our university and the schools across Vermont that prepare our graduates from high school for our communities. We can't talk about education without talking about workforce development. And what we know, I grew up in Orange County, where there's more lights off than lights on in Newberry and Bradford, where we don't have enough people going into the jobs that we need for our communities to be whole. Educators, nurses, law enforcement, first responders, accountants, electricians for the electric vehicle, those folks who can help us move to a green economy, to be weatherized and more fuel efficient. We haven't had an honest conversation in the state about the massive recruitment and retention challenges we have in those very jobs, those very high-paying jobs that we need for our communities to be whole. What we know from the McClure Foundation is that right now there are 62 different high-paying jobs that are available. So if we think about workforce development and the Vermont that we want, and we put communities at the focus of the Lieutenant Governor's office, then we talk about education. The state has been coming to the legislature. Our state colleges have been coming to the legislature asking for funding, and not only asking for funding, but asking for a concrete and actionable plan for our colleges for years. And we haven't answered that call. I was the first candidate several weeks ago to call for 2 things. One, an immediate creation of a statewide task force, not consultants, not a study, but a task force that focuses on workforce development, that brings our state colleges together to come up with an immediate actionable strategy and plan for our colleges that puts workforce development as the focus. And 2, to commit to $25 million over 5 years right now for our colleges, combined with that actionable plan. And our education system may look different from here on out. We won't have duplication. We'll have to do more with less, and that's okay. But if we center the focus on our communities, on workforce development, and the education we need for our students to thrive and survive and to do well in Vermont, we will have a bright future for the state.
Thank you, Molly. I appreciate that. And I appreciate everyone's patience as well. You know, we're trying to do all this work while we still have family life and things happening in the background. So you can hear my son as a part of these conversations today. So up next, please, I'd like to welcome Senator Ash. Thank you.
There we go. Well, thanks. I've taught 3 courses at CCV and 1 at what was Johnson State. So I absolutely appreciate how critical public higher education is for so many people throughout the state, especially people from more rural areas who are likely to commute to school rather than live in dorms at a particular campus. So let me talk a little bit about the funding picture. And I think that the framing of the question is right. Beginning in about 1980, governors and legislatures of both parties have created a funding trend which has put us where we are now. The red couch, which is I'm sitting on right now, I was sitting on several years ago when the chancellor of the state college system came here to talk with me with his state house liaison and said, if we get $4 million more a year to operate, the state college system will be sustainable moving forward. We got them the $4 million, and guess what? The moment we gave it to them, they came back saying, now we're in more crisis, we need more money. I tell you that story because what I think has been true is that the leadership of the state college system has been a mess. I think the finances are a mess. And I think easy solutions about how much money it takes and what it's going to look like are not so straightforward. So when the chancellor of the system proposed closing 3 campuses without any advance warning to the students, the faculty, the staff, or the local communities, I quickly worked with Speaker Johnson to put the kibosh on that proposal and tell the Board of Trustees they were not going to vote, and we were going to figure out something to support higher education on all those campuses. Many weeks ago, not 2 weeks ago, many weeks ago, we created a pathway to both stabilize the upcoming academic year at all of the campuses with a commitment to short-term funding to help them through COVID, and a commitment to come up with bridge funding for the next year while we figure out what the long-term future of those campuses will be. It will likely be higher education in partnership with both state and other public agencies, nonprofit training centers, and the private sector where it's appropriate. I'm not for privatizing our public higher education systems, but we already have many great partnerships with our public state college system with local employers like GW Plastics down at Vermont Technical College. We have formed a group of higher ed experts in state to band together for the next 6 months to work on developing reasonable, realistic strategies that will preserve higher education at all of the campuses. We have also brought on the former chancellor of the main state college system to try to get to the bottom of what's going on with our state college finances. It is one of those weird situations where if you ask the chancellor's office, they'll say things aren't so good, but then you ask each college president and they say, my campus is doing well, it's the other ones that are the problem. Well, we need to get to the bottom of it and create a real system moving forward with predictability that respects the students, faculty, and staff, and ensures access to quality higher education, no matter where you live in the state.
Thank you so much. I just want to acknowledge that we're having some technical difficulties really briefly. So we're trying to get Senator Ingram back into the meeting. Again, we're just grateful that everyone is patient and willing to be flexible, as these are just crazy circumstances. So we will get her back, I promise. So thank you very, very much for your patience while we wait for that. And as soon as I know that she's back in, we will make sure that we get her in the rotation. So the next question that I have, we will make sure that Debbie gets her time as she was cut off as well earlier. So we've spoke about a number of different issues, and now we're going to pivot a little bit to speak about healthcare. So the cost of healthcare are skyrocketing. And our current for-profit insurance system is unaffordable for the majority of Vermonters. The state has allowed the private insurance market to place significant increases on premiums year after year. COVID may push some hospitals, medical centers, and doctors' offices to close. What are your proposals as the Lieutenant Governor to increase access to affordable health care? What does that look like for you within that role? So let me see if we do have Senator Ingram. I do apologize. We'll go ahead and begin as we're trying to just get resituated. Oh, she's back. So we do have Senator Ingram. Hi, wherever you are in our world there. I see you now. Hi. Perfect. So we're addressing healthcare. If you can talk to us a little bit about what your proposals are to increasing access to affordable healthcare. Thank you all for staying with us through this.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, so I serve on the Senate Healthcare Committee. So again, something that I spend a lot of my time thinking and talking about. You know, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I am a strong supporter of universal health care. And I think that's the only way we're ever really going to have a decent system that everyone can access and that provides, you know, kind of care that we're really looking for. So I was one of the co-sponsors of a universal primary care bill to try to you know, what the problem always seems to be, is how do we pay for it? And of course, the idea is that we use collective funds, tax funds, in lieu of premiums to insurance companies to be able to pay for our care. And I do think that the all-payer model that we have, in which we put together the funds from Medicaid, Medicare, and the commercial insurers, is working to lower the actual costs of delivering healthcare, because then we take those funds, we pool them, and then we're sending them through the OneCare, which is a voluntary organization, to hospitals and other healthcare providers to try to get away from the fee-for-service model and instead pay them an expected revenue to care for people in a community, in a geographic region. And that is, there's a lot of data to support that gets us on the right track to change the culture of the way that we do healthcare delivery. But there's some big gap from that to what is going on with the insurance companies. And that's what we really have to look carefully at and see why our premiums are not going down. In fact, they continue to skyrocket year after year. And you know, the pharmaceutical companies and the insurance companies are the ones who are benefiting most from the way our system is now. And we have to continue to move towards getting them out of the system completely and focusing on paying not fee-for-service, but paying, doing global payments to our healthcare providers.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Brenda, how can we achieve affordable healthcare?
So first, I just want to say that if this particular crisis has not told us why we need Medicare for all, then I don't know what is going to tell us that. We absolutely need to address that in a meaningful way in this moment. I know that Rights and Democracy is working on a Medicare for all proposal, a new version of a universal healthcare in Vermont, or a coalition between states. Both of those things are things that I think we should be exploring, and we should be, you know, Act 48 did not get funded, and it should have been, but since it didn't, we need to move backwards and take out some of the compromises that were made that weren't the best compromises for people's healthcare. And I'm not a huge fan of the all-payer model, and in part, I'm not a huge fan is because the way it was implemented started with using Medicaid patients as guinea pigs, and I have a huge problem with that method. Because what that says is, let's see if this works on the poorest people. And already those people don't get seen by dentists all the time because dentists don't want to take what Medicaid pays. And other doctors as well. And so we need to essentially start over and build towards a Medicare for all program or universal health care, single payer right here in Vermont. And one of the ways that we do that is we begin to talk to folks, because what folks care about is having money in their pockets. It's not the tax. So that we need to explain exactly what folks will save, even though they'll have an added tax to pay for healthcare. And so I think that that's an initial response. And then starting right away, I think we could have already started with the universal primary care. The fact that that bill has not gone through and that we haven't supported it the way that we should have has been harmful to many Vermonters all across the state. And then we need to address the issues where people of color often do not get heard by doctors. Also, low-income folks often do not get heard by doctors. And so we do have to get to a place where we have an honest conversation about how the policies that we make impact the people who are struggling the most. And the only way to do that is with those people at the table.
Thank you, Brenda. Appreciate that. Molly.
We can do this. We can fix healthcare in Vermont. We've taken a lot of important steps. We're getting closer. I think it's time to take us across the line, and that's what we should commit the Lieutenant Governor's office to. Again, it's prioritizing our communities and our families in that office. I want to talk about three things. Universal access to primary care, moving from the fee-for-service model to a model that focuses on social determinants of health, and then a real practical question around how do we ensure that if you're living in the Upper Valley and you need to go to Dartmouth Hitchcock across the river, New Hampshire, or if you're living in Bennington, you need to go to Albany, how you can do that under a model that works. So one, I think we need to decouple having a job with accessing healthcare. Right now, we know that there are so many Vermonters who do not have a job, and they should not have to worry about having insurance to access healthcare. That shouldn't just be a COVID-19 challenge. That is a challenge for people every single day. So we need to decouple and focus on access to healthcare, period, for our communities. Second, we have an abundance of specialists in Vermont, but not enough primary care providers. I think we're 25% primary care providers, 75% specialists. Let's flip the model so that there's a focus on preventative care in our communities around the state. Finally, if we look to our regional partners, to New Hampshire, to New York, to Massachusetts, to ensure that you can take your insurance or take access to your hospital that's across the river or across the state line, just to ensure that we have access to the best care and that care is accessible to our communities. So I think those are three areas where we can focus. It's really putting healthcare at the forefront along with our families and communities and centering the Lieutenant Governor's office around that.
Thank you. Thank you. Senator Ash.
Well, this is another instance where who we elect governor makes an enormous difference. I don't think it requires a lot of deep thought by people participating in this forum to know that if Phil Scott is the governor, the idea of universal primary care or universal much of anything else is likely to occur without the most Herculean community-based and legislative sort of coming together to overcome huge odds, which is why David or Rebecca really needs to be the next governor if we want to advance many of these really far-reaching proposals. I was a strong supporter of what became Act 48 and helped write it. One of the great disappointments for me and many of us who have for 20 plus years supported universal healthcare was when Governor Shumlin decided to pull the plug. I truly believe one of the primary problems that he had with moving forward was that his way of developing the proposals was to have behind the scenes meetings with people who had not been in the fight for universal healthcare all those years. And when they were not accepting what it would take to get it done, that's when the plug got pulled. I think there are a few things that are on my mind right now that are actionable to do something around healthcare. The first, because there is one bit of good news, which is that virtually everyone has insurance. The unfortunate thing is for many of them, they don't have enough money or can't afford to actually access the insurance they have. But one problem we face right now with increasing premiums from Blue Cross, Blue Shield, and MVP is even now in COVID-19, they're coming forward and saying they need increases. Well, they have fairly substantial reserves. And whenever we've challenged them for why they're sitting on millions and millions of dollars, rather than reducing premiums with that money, they say, well, there could be a pandemic. Well, the pandemic's here, so I think it's time to see if we can relieve the cost pressure on the Vermonters who are currently insured by Blue Cross and MVP by diving into those reserves. We certainly need to increase our investments in primary care, and we've made some strides in the last couple of years, despite a governor who has vetoed any new revenues, including a single penny in fees, to make sure that we're providing more money for our primary care providers and others. We need to go further by eliminating co-pays wherever we can, both for physical, but very importantly, also for mental health. Both of those investments are required in order to reduce the big picture hospitalization expenses, which we've seen in recent years with the flooding of our emergency rooms with people who are there for mental health reasons, not physical health reasons. And then finally, We have to continue to do everything we can to tackle the prescription drug industry for the exorbitant prices for desperately needed medicines. When I worked for Bernie, I helped coordinate one of his trips over the border to Canada, where we got tamoxifen, which was then the primary drug for women who had breast cancer, where the cost was 1/10 of what it is here in the United States. I was very proud to be the co-author and lead sponsor of legislation to allow for reimportation from Canada safely and securely. We got that passed. Other states are now following our lead, and it may be the one instance where the Trump administration might actually help us save some money and get something positive done.
Great, thank you, Senator. Okay, so we have a few more questions that we'd love to ask. I want to be cognizant of time. We've had some technical difficulties and we wanted to give people space to work within those. So I will take a little bit of moderator's privilege to ask if folks might be willing to hang with us so that we can have these last few questions in. It's impossible to cover every single area of social change that's necessary. And we have such a large pool of incredible candidates to hear from and to learn from and to decide around. So we want to make sure we get a chance to do some of that work. So now I'm going to move to the environment. So the climate crisis is upon us, and we have to take action to mitigate the causes today to ensure that there's actually a viable future for our state and our nation in the years to come. So whether it's the promotion of electric cars to weatherization programs, there are a number of solutions and innovative programs that are already underway within our state to create a green future. That in mind, which solution are you most interested in accelerating, and how might you achieve that from your role as Lieutenant Governor? Senator Ingram, can you start us off?
Technology. So let me try that again. There are a number of different things that we need to be doing simultaneously. I think so. It's hard to mention just one. I think that one area is increasing the efficiency of our homes and buildings. So investing in weatherization and in efficiency. I'm one of the co-sponsors of a bill that was put forward by Senator Polina that is a Green New Deal that would set up a fund by taxing the highest earning Vermonters with a surcharge to create a fund to fund conservation programs like weatherization, thermal efficiency, renewable heating systems, and public transportation. But I think there are other things that are also extremely important that we look at. We need to look at our renewable energy, making sure that our grid is green and pushing our utilities to be 100% renewable by 2030, putting caps on how much energy we can take from the big hydro dams. And then I also think transportation is a huge area that we need to focus on. And I support TCI and the regional Cap and Invest program. I think, especially as Lieutenant Governor, working with the other states in the area, Governor Scott has been sort of half-hearted at looking at that, but I think that's where a Lieutenant Governor could really step up and talk to counterparts in the other states in the area to try to make sure that we move ahead with TCI. I also hope that the Global Warming Solutions Act that the House passed, that we can get that done, get that passed in the Senate as well. Don't know how the governor's going to react to that, but I think it's important to make the statement to focus on this critical problem from many different angles.
Thank you, Senator. Brenda.
Yeah, so I want to just start by saying that right now we're seeing that when science dictates we must make change, we are able to change our behavior. We're seeing that with COVID-19, and we can see that with climate change. And while I agree that it is going to matter who our governor is, we have to be fighting for these issues right now. We have to be willing to create the groundswell like we did with the colleges to change this. We can't just say, well, we'll have to see who's in charge. Because it's never happened that our leaders that our elected folks are leading us. It has always been true that we lead them. And as long as we give it up to them, then we don't get the change that we need and want. And so it is time for us to do that. And I do support a Green Mountain New Deal, and I do support both Polina's version, and I also have been itching and keep asking, because I'm so itching to look at the Rights and Democracy's Green Mountain New Deal and Green New England New Deal, because I think that what we're seeing right now in this forum, I mean, we don't center the voices of marginalized people. We don't even center talking about them at this forum. And I want to be honest, it's frustrating me right now. I think that we absolutely don't even make an effort to talk about it right now. And so I saw that was asked of us, and I would love it if we were mentioning it more. And so I want to say that yes, transportation is one of the most important pieces, because we are huge carbon emitters right now here in the state. And not only that, because our aging population, I'm on the board at COVE, Community of Vermont Elders, and our aging population is isolated at home. And not only that, I myself lost my car for 2 months in the fall, and I have never done, somehow in 20 years, that in all my poverty, that has never happened to me. And I'm here to tell you that it really is as bad as it sounds. It is horrible and it is demoralizing. And so not only is transportation essential for climate change, but it's essential for the people who are struggling the most in this state. And so we need to focus on that. And there's a lot of things we can do. We can do microtransit. We can connect right now, even before the TCI, which I absolutely support, we can connect our current bus routes together, working with the private agencies, so that we can have a fare free transit, like is trying to be worked on in Burlington. And we can work on weatherization initiatives, renewable energy initiatives, and we can center all of it around the people who need us to do that the most.
Thank you, Brenda. Molly?
I'm afraid there isn't one solution and one thing to focus on when it comes to preventing the impact of climate change in our communities and taking bold action now. I think our greatest challenge is putting those who are most affected and those experts who know our working land and our environment at the table in our decision making. 1. 2, we also have to hold our statewide officials in governments and corporations, businesses accountable for the communities they operate in and the communities they serve. So I want to focus specifically on the Global Warming Solutions Act. I think we've talked a lot about the GWSA, but what practically does that mean for us as a state in this moment? It gives us an opportunity as leaders, for example, the Lieutenant Governor, to say, we are going to do our part to take steps to meet the Paris Climate Agreement, which means we're going to take steps to help Vermonters weatherize their homes, buy fuel efficient vehicles, get jobs in solar, weatherization, in the jobs that we need for our economies to thrive in a climate resilient world. That is our opportunity. That is our call to action. We have a Global Warming Solutions Act bill that has passed the House, that is in the Senate. We could move on that now. We need to step forward as elected officials, as leaders, to say we will do our part and we're going to help Vermonters do their part.
Thank you, Molly. Senator Ash?
Thank you. Yeah, this is an issue that has been both important to me in my legislative work, but also personally. I've helped author virtually every climate change fighting bill in the legislature for the last 10 years, but professionally at Cathedral Square, developed 2 solar projects, and also helped manage what might have been the largest residential weatherization project in Vermont's history, 108 apartments at 3 Cathedral Square in downtown Burlington. On the Global Warming Solutions Act, just to situate it, that bill came to us from the House basically the week we had to shut down because of COVID. And so our Natural Resources Committee can be perhaps forgiven for having been focused on life-saving bills in the short term, and they've actually been taking the bill up in recent days. So I'm confident we'll get that one to the finish line. And while it ultimately says we aim to meet these goals and develop a process to identify strategies, we have to take action now. Transportation and Climate Initiative, which I've perhaps been the most outspoken champion of our participation of anyone in the legislature, is absolutely critical. Transportation emissions are about half of all of our harmful emissions that we emit as Vermonters. And this would not just have the benefit of helping reduce Vermonters' emissions, but would have us banding together with up to 11 other states. So Vermont could be leveraging our environmental impact way more broadly and way more beneficially to the environment. I believe now is the time for a major weatherization bond. It has been shown in Germany in particular that bonding for weatherization, which is building efficiency, residential and commercial, can actually put more money back in the Treasury than it costs the Treasury to pay the interest on the bonds. This is an important moment, especially with so many people out of work, because it's a very labor-intensive activity. We absolutely need to do more to get people out of single occupant vehicles. The TCI monies that would come to Vermont are one important way we could help support alternative modes to single occupant vehicles. I also worked with Capstone and Sue Minter to make sure that we're not just providing incentives for people to get into electric vehicles, which are primarily affordable only to those with pretty significant resources, but to make sure that people who did not have much money could get into vehicles that were far more efficient and save them money at the same time. And finally, we really have to step up our game and be one of the national leaders on storage of generated solar.
Yeah, thank you for that, for sure. So now we're coming to our final question of the evening. I want to thank you all again for still hanging with us. So this one is actually about criminal and racial justice. So our criminal justice system, it needs major reform. Vermont has the highest rate per capita of Black men incarcerated. Interactions with law enforcement show significant racial disparities in police interactions for people of color. Over-prosecution of substance abuse-related charges is a common occurrence, and Vermont residents are being detained in ICE facilities in the region. How will your office influence the application of criminal justice reform in a way that brings true equity and equal application of the law for all impacted persons in your role as the Lieutenant Governor? Can we begin with Senator Ingram?
I would put my record around racial justice against any legislator in the State House. I think partly because I am myself a member of a minority. I'm a member of the LGBTQ community and have been discriminated against in my life because of my sexual orientation. I certainly have a great deal of empathy for anyone who is discriminated against on the basis of any quality that they have that other people decide they don't like. So I have worked tirelessly to introduce legislation to mitigate the impacts of racial inequality. I was a champion for the Ethnic Studies bill. I was the sole sponsor of the change from Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. For 3 years, I worked to try to get that passed and was scoffed at by some of the veteran legislators more than once in the battle to get that passed and enacted. And I was also the person who initiated the proposition to amend the Constitution to clarify the prohibition against slavery. I have introduced 6 different bills around racial equity in particularly focusing on law enforcement. And that led to the initiation of the Racial Equity Panel and the Racial Equity Director who are now functioning at the state. And certainly it is true the way the question is phrased, it ties racial inequality to our criminal justice system. This actually is an issue that we have focused on at Vermont Interfaith Action for many years as well. And that is so true. Our system is disproportionately against people of color, especially Black men. And we have made strides in Vermont, and we need to not let up though and continue to do more. We need to, we have decriminalized certain things that are nonviolent offenses, cannabis possession for one, so that we don't imprison people just immediately. We have court diversion programs. But we need to do more to improve the correction system the way it is now, to improve our facilities, to have more and better programs to prepare people for release. And I'm out of time, but I have a lot of ideas, and this would be one of the primary focuses of if I were to be Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you very much, Senator. Brenda.
So we've had, 1 in 14 Black men ends up in jail in their lifetime. We have incredibly high, if you get a chance to go to Justice for All's website, incredibly high disproportionate traffic stops for people of color in our state. And we, again, like I said earlier, we are suspending people of color in school, children of color, and targeting their parents in different ways. I also just want to speak for a moment on substance use disorder. Many of you may know that it was March 7th of 2018 when I decided I would run for governor, and March 8th of 2018 when my nephew died of a heroin overdose. And he was a son of my brother who died just over 20 years ago, also while using heroin. In his life, we need to focus for that illness, we need to focus on harm reduction first, which would mean really focusing on decriminalization, treatment and recovery on demand, including medically assisted treatment on demand, dual diagnosis support, and criminal justice reform. But what I really want to talk about that is that he was targeted multiple times for having substance use disorder, but did not end up in jail long term. He did end up dead because of that, but he did not end up in jail for earlier. And that he would, if he had been a person of color, he would have had a completely different outcome, and we would not have had the same time with him, and there would have been much less hope in terms of getting him out of that cycle. So while we did not succeed as hard as we tried, he didn't have that same other people would have less opportunity even. And so I really do want to center that reality, even though as painful as our family's reality is, what we're really addressing with people of color across the state is a step even further. And of course, we have a very good bill going through right now, but the reality is that, like, for example, when we're looking at cannabis reform and we're looking at tax and regulate, we aren't centering people of color in a meaningful way who will be able to set up retail shops. We are not centering the same people that have harmed, and we still have people in jail right now who were given disproportionate sentences to their white counterparts. And so I think that we do need to have I've worked with Tom Dalton at Vermont for criminal justice reform. I do thank Debbie, who is a champion on this issue as well. And I think that we do need to actually have not just a broad conversation, but we do need to actually say what is real, not just this is what's possible right now. We need to say what we need to do and then get there, because it's not okay to harm people on the way there. It's just not okay. And you can hear that how frustrated I get with this issue, but there are people sitting in jail right now disproportionately being impacted by COVID because they were given disproportionate sentences. We are causing harm and we haven't fixed it, and we need to go back and do that.
Thank you, Brenda. Molly?
I've committed my career to serving others, to fighting for human rights. I serve as an assistant attorney general now. And I think the question that we have to ask ourselves every single day as lawyers, as leaders, as policymakers, is not only, is it legal, but is it right? Our job is to push the needle in the direction of, is it right? How are we advancing law to address the biggest issues facing us in our communities every day? As Lieutenant Governor, I will bring the experience that I have as a prosecutor, the experience that I have in running human rights monitoring missions around the world, into Baghdad, into Basra, into the Niger Delta, reviewing companies for their human rights compliance, in fighting for humanitarian assistance, and the focus on need first and foremost when we think about our communities. Here in Vermont, we have come a long way in some areas, but we haven't focused on fair and impartial policing enough. We haven't looked at some of our police stations and law enforcement officials where we might not be meeting the mark, and we could do a lot better. How do we invest? How do we ensure that we are training? How are we ensuring that we are holding those accountable who are not representing our best values and best work? But first and foremost, and most importantly, we have to have those who are most greatly impacted at the table as we think about the policies and where we go to align the law with what is right in Vermont.
Thank you, Molly. Senator Ash.
Thanks. Well, I'll just tell you a quick anecdote which speaks to the nature of this problem. Back when Bill Sorrell was the Attorney General, I was a member of a panel that traveled the state and held some hearings on the issue of implicit bias in law enforcement. And I kid you not, one police chief actually said, "My department doesn't need to be trained in implicit bias because I know we don't have any." Now let that settle in and think about that. And I think you'll appreciate what an insane statement that is. And it is true, we have come some distance, but have a long way to go. I think the fact that we are still struggling to get certain law enforcement agencies to provide the racial data for traffic stops is an indication, a very easy one for people to understand the cultural shift we're still struggling to make with many law enforcement agencies, and we have to keep on it. My view is that among all of the strategies, from the moment of first police interaction to the moment of a sentencing, of reviewing and making sure that we are not seeing disproportionate sanctions every step of the way, but we need also to focus on systematic criminal justice reform. Several years ago, I helped write the nation's leading juvenile justice reform legislation. This will make sure that many young people who make that first mistake don't wind up being thrown in with hardened criminals. My dad worked as a probation officer for 43 years. So from him, I learned very, very, very fully that most people have made a mistake. It shouldn't define the rest of their lives. And since our system disproportionately affects communities of color, this should help disproportionately reduce the number of injustices inflicted upon them. Last year, I challenged our Senate Judiciary Committee to push for a reduction in the number of incarcerated individuals so that we could get out of the business of housing people in for-profit prisons out of state. I have heard many politicians talk about how it's a moral injustice to send people out of the state, but they've been unwilling to come forward with strategies to actually reduce the number of inmates safely and appropriately. And we are on the verge of passing that legislation this year, thanks to the great work of our counterparts in the House and leaders in the Senate. I also worked with Selena Colburn, who's a House member some of you may know, and was the Senate lead to make sure that all people behind bars who had addiction issues would get medication-assisted treatment, making our state one of the most progressive on that front as well. So much work to do, including the affected communities as at the center of knowing which strategies we need to deploy to have a more equitable system. But as someone who hates discrimination in all form, I would make that a priority as Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you so much, Senator. This has been an incredible discussion and you all stuck it out. I'm so grateful for that. A huge thank you to each of the candidates for joining us today and each of you for participating in today's event. Be sure to join us again on Friday at 7 p.m. for our gubernatorial forum. So be sure to visit our page of Rights and Democracy, that's radvt.org, or on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube for events and information. I want to thank you all once again. Please, everyone, stay safe and healthy, and together we win. Have a wonderful night.